I think the number one thing that you're going to look for is the location and try to find people that are very, very similarly located to you. Then you kind of want to branch off a little bit and then look for similar amenities. Similar, even if it's not in the exact location, are you still 2 miles away from a hospital? Look for those types of things, the things that you would consider the selling point for your property. If you've got a pool, you've got pool access, that's a selling point. Let's go and look for things that have pools. If you have an EV charger, I live in Knoxville, Tennessee. Right before we got on here, I searched Furnished Finder. There are 4 properties that have an EV charger. If I have that, I know those are the people that I need to talk to. And I think it's really important for you to, one, be honest with yourselves about your property and say, like, hey, we've got our minimum price now. We know what that threshold is. Obviously, we want to maximize revenue, but be honest about your properties. Compare apples to apples.
Welcome to the Landlord Diaries, where we talk about midterm rentals and the opportunities behind them. We'll share landlord stories, talk about maximizing investment potential, and discuss how to live the very best landlord life. This podcast is proudly brought to you by Furnished Finder, the leader and largest online marketplace for midterm rentals. Remember to like and subscribe if you enjoy our content.
Today, we're tackling how to price your midterm rentals to stay competitive and profitable. Joining us is Kyle Driskell, Senior Solutions Consultant at PriceLabs. We'll discuss practical strategies to help you set smarter rates and maximize your rental income. Kyle, we really appreciate you joining us. We're excited for your expertise. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic, and that was a lovely introduction. So thank you very much. I think we do the RevLabs podcast, and I kind of want you to come and do my intros now from now on. That'd be great.
That would be an honor. We can work that out later.
Yep.
So, one of the main things that we want to talk about first is the pricing problem, right? Like why hosts struggle with midterm rental rates and how to price it. But before we discuss that, why don't you give us a brief overview of, why you joined Price Labs and what's your story that makes you an expert in this field?
Yeah, absolutely. And I really appreciate the time, and I love representing Price Labs. A little background about myself. I used to work for a really large property management company, mainly in the short-term rental space. So we did a lot of the short-term focus, but in that, I learned a lot about midterm rentals as well. I think, there's a lot of people that will, do hybrid strategies or, just completely change it up. If the short-term rental game wasn't working for them, we tried the midterm rental. So that was kind of my first foray into midterm rentals. And as I got to Price Labs, I just started learning more and more about it. So working with customers, understanding the differences and the nuances, and really what you have to try to achieve with a midterm rental. So obviously we want to cover our bases, cover our costs, make sure we get those 5-star ratings, kind of just the same way as we do with short-term rentals. There's a lot that you can compare, but there's so much in midterm rentals that is different from short-term rentals. So I'm really looking forward to talk about that.
Definitely. And one of the things we're going to really focus on for this episode is, what are the internal Furnish Finder tools you can use for pricing? And then, of course, how can you boost those pricing strategies with Price Labs as well? So, some of those common pricing problems that hosts struggle with is that fear of overpricing or
Yep.
underpricing. So why don't we start, Katie? Why don't you kind of lead into the Furnish Finder outlook in this, and then why don't Kyle you follow that with what you see on the Price Lab side?
Yeah, I think, it is a pretty common fear from the midterm rental landlord as far as like, am I too high? Am I not high enough? Could I be getting more for my property to help cover more expenses and pull more profit? I think it's a very common theme that we hear. Especially since once you get a tenant, you're usually locked in at that rate for between 90 days, it could be upwards of 6 months if you want. So pricing is it's particularly important, I think, in midterm as compared to short term. And you can kind of give me your insights on this too, Kyle, because like if you say $2,000 a month and you sign a 6 month lease, like you're locked in, right? So that fear
Yep.
of overpricing and underpricing, I think gets elevated a little bit.
I think it's extremely elevated for midterm rentals because you have such a fine timeline to get those booked up. And if you're in a short-term rental, you can fill something with 2 days or 3 days. But if you're going for a midterm rental and somebody, leaves a little bit of a gap, like a 15-day gap, depending on where you're at, that can be really, really troublesome to your revenue strategy. So I think it's really important to make sure that you're dialed in, that kind of in the market, what are people actually booking at? If we go to furnishfinder.com right now and look at July, we're going to see the people that are available and we're going to see those rates that they were at. I like going in and looking a little bit ahead of time and trying to find some comp units for yourself so that you can really understand what's attainable. So you don't want to shoot for the stars if you don't have something that can attain those stars, and you also don't want to, shoot yourself on the foot and not get as much money as you can.
Well, I think this is the perfect lead in to let's dive in how to find that price, how to get your pricing strategy, how to know. We've got Kyle here who is the master from PriceLabs, and he's going to help us so that you're not guessing, right? And you can overcome that fear or of am I too high priced, am I not high enough, where do I land? So first step is determining your monthly expenses, and you've hinted at that a little bit, Kyle, but talk to us about what should really go into this, because I think a lot of times people just say, oh, my mortgage is $1,000 or my mortgage is $2,000. What else do you really need to think of and consider when you're determining your monthly expenses as a part of the equation?
Yeah, I think for a midterm rental, I think it's really good to start looking broadly and look at it as an overall year as well. So you're going to have your minimums that you've got to hit and all of that, but there's so much that you can do with your calendar that I want you to kind of start by taking a look at it as a 12-month picture and then break it into quarters. So if we can segment it and say, hey, this is what my yearly goal is, this is what my quarterly goal is, and then maybe get down to that monthly average, you can really, really optimize your strategy. I do think that going in and making sure that you're covering all those expenses that you have to have, the utilities, trash removal, all of that stuff. You want to make sure that you are absolutely covering all of those and then also having just a little bit extra on top of there for you. Some of the ways that you can go in, and we mentioned a couple times I'm with PriceLabs. I don't want this to come across as your audience as a sales pitch whatsoever. So I do want to talk about how they can observe this stuff on Furnish Finder. At the end of it, you can always come to PriceLabs, find this information as well. But in Furnish Finder, you can go in and look at calendars and really, really start to understand a lot with what they've provided you. One of the things that I would suggest is, I know we're talking about the expenses side of it, but ultimately your expenses, if you've got $1,000 as your total expense level, your minimums that you may see in the market are around 1,500. You could look at that and say, I'm covered with my expenses. Let's just add a little bit on top of that and kind of meet in between and really, maximize your revenue that way.
Yeah, we're definitely here to give everybody kind of a holistic approach to pricing. I think Price Labs is a fantastic tool in the toolbox, one that people shouldn't miss, but there's a lot of other things that you need to consider and that can help you to kind of land on that number. I would encourage everybody when you're looking at your expenses, don't forget things like, are you going to have a damage protection plan? Do you have a reserve for maintenance? Do you have any condo or HOA fees? Have you set enough aside for utilities? Do you have any reserves for vacancy? I think a lot of times I've met with, and Kyle, I'm sure you've probably talked to hundreds of landlords who have the same. They're like, well, my mortgage is $1,000, so I need to pull in at least that. I'm like, no, that's not your total expenses. Like you want to make sure that you're your bare minimum is truly your bare minimum, right? And there are instances where in some properties, like you might be taking a loss for a while and that's part of your strategy or long-term hold, or you're waiting for a market to rebound or something to appreciate. That's a little bit more sophisticated and that's totally fine. But just understanding that, like, you want to make sure that you're counting utilities. You want to make sure that you have a reserve for maintenance or furnishing upgrades. All of those things are going to be really important when you're finding your number.
Absolutely. And one additional thing to add on top of that, I don't know if we'll get into, the amenities and pet friendly type atmospheres and things like that. But if you're a
Yep.
pet friendly type of a property, make sure that you have a little bit of extra built in there as well, just in case anything does happen. That way you can get it fixed up real quick for your next tenant.
I'm going to take a minute to address something that both of you have mentioned, the idea of gaps in midterm rentals. On the Landlord Diaries, we've actually heard numerous hosts, including myself and Katie, say over 95% occupancy with their midterm rentals. So you're not necessarily seeing large gaps. And even if you do have a week or two gap once here or there, that actually is still very minimal on your vacancies. So we're going to get into some pricing strategies later, but let's keep going on how to find that sweet spot in your rental rate. Great feedback so far. So, we've talked about the expenses and just going into, hey, you really have to understand what your costs are going to be and are you going to be able to be profitable. So, the next part of that is researching the market to see what am I actually going to be able to charge to offset that expense and see that it is profitable for me to go ahead and move forward with the midterm rental strategy. So, Katie, what are those Furnished Finder steps we recommend for getting started in the midterm rental space and analyzing this?
Yeah, I think it's important to look at the stats page, furnishedfinder.com/stats. There, we're going to give you some insights. We also call it market insights. So, what I like to do is look at it as a ratio. It will show you the total number of listings and the total number of page views. Then, from that, you can derive number of page views per listing. You want to see that number high, right? You want to see some really strong demand in that area. I like to see it at 3, 4, 500 or above. It's going to depend market to market. Don't get thrown off if it's lower. You just want to make sure that you are diving deeper to really understand it. And then looking through the comparable listings. And Kyle, I would love to have you chime in here. When I'm looking at, if I'm looking at comps, what types of things do you like to look at? If I'm looking to like say, okay, well, what are other properties that are kind of like mine pricing themselves? Like, how do I know what is a true comparison?
Yeah. So let me ask a follow up to that. In the scenario, would we be starting on Furnished Finder, or would we be trying to identify something to differentiate ourselves? And kind of where I'm going with that is, you know, if we're going to the filters and things like that, you can utilize everything that's there for Furnish Finder really, really easily to go in there and find a way to differentiate yourself. And then also kind of following up on that as well, are we going to be talking about, the photo content, the quality and things like that? So which path would you like for me to take?
Today's episode is proudly sponsored by Furnished Finder, the ultimate platform for hassle-free midterm rentals. Whether you're a seasoned landlord or just getting started, Furnished Finder has everything you need to find your next tenant. With Furnished Finder, you can say goodbye to booking fees, markups, and commissions, and hello to direct bookings. If you're ready to experience all the benefits renting your property for 30 days or more, head over to furnishedfinder.com where you can list your property for one low annual price. We make it easy to get started.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's great. Let's talk about first just if maybe I don't even know what my pricing is going to be, right? Or anything like that, and I'm very preliminary, like how do I know roughly what I could get for this type of property? Maybe I'm not trying to kind of like upscale it or get, higher revenue or anything like that quite yet. But what if I'm just sitting here and I'm kind of like, I have a two bed, two bath guest house and I'm in Phoenix, Arizona and I'm on
Yeah.
Furnished Finder. How do I know that other properties I'm looking at would be comparables, right? Like what kind of things are important when I'm trying to like comp a property one to one?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think the number one thing that you're gonna look for is the location and try to find people that are very, very similarly located to you. Then you kind of want to branch off a little bit and then look for similar amenities. Similar, even if it's not in the exact location, are you still 2 miles away from a hospital? Look for those types of things, the things that you would consider the selling point for your property. If you've got a pool, you've got pool access, that's a selling point. Let's go and look for things that have pools. If you have an EV charger, I live in Knoxville, Tennessee. Right before we got on here, I searched Finder. There are 4 properties that have an EV charger. If I have that, I know those are the people that I need to talk to. And I think it's really important for you to one, be honest with yourselves about your property and say, like, hey, we've come up, we've got our minimum price now. We know what that threshold is. Obviously, we want to maximize revenue, but be honest about your
Right.
properties. Compare apples to apples.
Yep.
If you have a private fence, make sure the places that you're looking at have private fences as well. Or if they don't, in the back of your mind, add a little bit of extra value for that if what you're seeing in your comp set doesn't have that privacy.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and it's kind of arbitrary based off the market. If you have a pool, you could say maybe that adds an extra $50 a night. Again, it's gonna be an arbitrary number based off where you're at, but you should look at all those selling points that you've got. And those main selling points are gonna be the amenities, privacy, and
Yep.
location, proximity, and things like that.
Yeah, and I think pet friendliness would be a huge one, especially for midterm stays. And like how you're
Absolutely.
furnishing it, right? Like I've when I've been looking for comps for properties of mine or properties that I'm looking at, it's kind of like, okay, how else are other ones furnishing this? Because if you can tell it's kind of outdated furnishings or things that have seen a lot of wear and tear, well, your property might have brand new furnishings or you might be willing to invest a little bit more. Those are all things that make that number flex a little bit here and there, and are really important to remember.
Absolutely, and if you don't mind, I'm gonna kinda talk a little bit about the research that I did in the Knoxville area that I was looking at. And when I was looking at some of the stuff towards the lower end of the market, and when I say lower end, I don't mean quality, I mean in the pricing that's still available. You could find certain things like, okay, if they updated their duvet covers and put some, blackout curtains in there, they could probably charge a little bit more in there. But those differentiators are so big. And just to kind of talk about how important it is for your overall ability to generate revenue, in Knoxville, we had 251 properties on Furnished Finder. We had 150 of those that said they had a dedicated workspace. That's about half of them, so to speak, a little bit more than half. But then when we start layering on other things, so let's say I'm coming to Knoxville, I want to stay at a place for 3 months or 6 months or however long. I need a workspace, I need good internet, and I have a pet and I want to bring my pet. When you start layering those things on there, the opportunities for people to book are a lot lower. And what we get down to is there's 13 listings that are pet friendly, that say they have good internet, that say that have a dedicated workspace. So that is something that you can do on that second option I was talking about earlier. When you want to find a way to differentiate yourself, go in there and play around with some of the stuff and see where you can add some extra value in there as well and see what people are wanting in your market also.
I just love hearing you 2 go back and forth about, the ways that you're pricing. Reminder, Katie and I are both active midterm rental hosts on Furnish Finder. I've got around 10 listings, Katie around 14. And some of the things that, we experience in our markets is sometimes you just got to jump in and test out pricing, right? It's like you don't want analysis paralysis to hold you up and all the research to just hold you up from getting started. So one of the things that I've done is, just that idea of when it comes to pricing, you do your research on Furnish Finder. You use PriceLabs as an extra boost. You want to look at Airbnb and Zillow and extended stay hotels to really just kind of check the market to see that you're on the right track. And then you get in there and you just price your rental. Now, what are some signs that maybe it's too high or too low? Well, you're getting a ton of inquiries and you have it booked right away. Maybe you price it too low for that one, or you're not getting any inquiries, maybe it's too high. So you can look at the signs there. Quality of the listing, of course, is important to factor into the pricing as well. If you don't have professional photos, you're not going to be able to price your listing as high. So keep those things in mind. And what I like to do is, my pricing only fluctuates about 8 to 10% throughout the year. I'm midterm rentals only. And once I get it booked, if it's a longer stay, then I'll bump it up a couple $100, so that if that next availability, someone is reaching out early, well, then I can test the market and see if a little bit higher pricing is okay. Or if I get within 30 days of my next availability, maybe I tweak it back to that rate I know has been reliable in the past. So that's how I do it. Katie, anything that you do pricing wise on Furnish Finder over the years that is kind of a hack you could share?
I mean, not really. I think just kind of knowing your numbers is really important, right? Knowing your bare minimum, knowing your bare minimum that you're willing to accept and being patient, right? It's okay if it takes a week or two to fill your spot or you have a little bit of a gap. I think with a midterm stay, typically the numbers work out better if you hold out for the rate that you truly believe that you have the value, versus giving a discount that maybe you're not comfortable with or doesn't fit your strategy, because then you're locked into that for quite a while. So I think my number one tip is just having confidence and having patience. And really, I like how, Kyle, you're really honing in on the amenities, because that's so important with midterm rentals. Like, what is your parking situation like, right? Are you pet friendly? Do you have a workstation? Do you have that EV charger? Do you have a private backyard? Is your location like unbeatable, right? Like, have confidence in those and know that they do have value.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And even with, having extra amenities and things like that, there's always that possibility that that's something that one person is looking for. So by being thorough, by being complete with your listings, making sure that on Furnished Finder you're going in and actually saying, "Hey, we've got these amenities in there." It's super, super important. And Kelly, you mentioned kind of the merchandising of the listings as well. That's super important because ultimately, Furnish Finder is a marketplace. So you want to have updated photos. You want to have them kind of in a way to tell a story, so to speak, as well. And, if you've got your numbers dialed in, your market, then you can start focusing on those little bitty ancillary things like those amenities and updating your photos and drawing more eyes to it.
The purpose of this episode is to help all of you feel confident in your midterm rental pricing strategies. We do have a Furnish Finder pricing worksheet coming out very soon. So see the show notes. It will be in there once it's available. And you are just going to feel so confident in your pricing. But we do want to take a moment to help PriceLabs be able to expand on the tools that kind of take that pressure off of you and do that pricing work for you. Because sometimes I forget. I'm like, oh, I still have that, I still have that price that I set a couple months ago. I need to adjust it. And Price Labs will do that for you. So I think there's some specific qualities that are valuable to midterm rental operators, that whether they're midterm rental only or the operate the hybrid strategy. So why don't you give us an overview of some of those, Kyle?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing I want to kind of point out is that there are so many marketplaces out there. Obviously, Furnish Finder is the one that we want you to be utilizing for your midterms, but there's a lot of data that's still out there. PriceLabs does scrape some additional websites that will give us some very specific midterm patterns. We can look on other websites and see, hey, are there certain amenities that may be working for them? Then all of a sudden we can pull that back over to Furnish Finder. But specifically, one of the things that PriceLabs really, really helps with midterm rentals is the dynamic pricing side of things. We don't need crazy, crazy spikes in our dynamic pricing. So if anybody out here has worked with short-term rentals, during low season we drop price, during high season we raise price real high. Midterm rentals don't need those spikes. But there are still things in the market that can move. So as long as we get that firm understanding of our market. An example I want to give again, I'm in Knoxville, Tennessee. It's a college town. As a midterm property owner in Knoxville, you can make a little bit more money during graduation season. The football season is not as impactful for midterm rentals because we have people coming in for, academia, coming in for the University of Tennessee Healthcare Center and things like that. But there are some extra spikes that you can get for midterm rentals. So if you have families that want to come in and stay for a little bit during graduation season, those things can be picked up in tools like PriceLabs. And again, it's not going to send your rates through the roof where you're trying to charge $800 a night, but it could help you add an extra $5 to $10 per day if we see that demand's increasing there. So think of it as PriceLabs would be able to do a little bit of heavy lifting for you. So that data analysis, the understanding of the market that we're talking about, it's built out to do that heavy lifting for you. lets you make some decisions and customize the tool how you want to, and then ultimately generate as much revenue as possible.
Yeah, and this is fantastic because pricing can feel like a really big decision. It can feel pretty intimidating, especially if you're not comfortable with it or if it's something you haven't done before. So PriceLabs can give you that head start. And then what's really cool is you can take that number or that suggestion from PriceLabs, put it into your Furnish Finder, and you can test it, right? And you can go up and down because you're in control of your Furnish Finder listing. And you also know that you're going to get 100% of that revenue, right? So there's no commissions, there's no booking fees. So you know that if you're charging $2,000 of rent, you don't have to sit there and try to do the calculations of, okay, but then how much do I actually get in my pocket after all of the fees or whatever? You know that that is pretty simple. So what you can focus on is feeling really good in that number and doing any improvements that you need to do. I would encourage everybody, if you make a pricing change, to keep an eye on your listing performance panel in your dashboard. That's going to show you your views, it's going to show you your favorites, it's going to show you your number of leads so you can keep track and see if that increases or if that decreases. But I think overall, like what I'm hearing you say, Kyle, is that dynamic pricing where you're changing your pricing all the time. It's just not as much of a thing in midterm rentals at all, which is honestly like quite the relief because that sounds it's that would be a lot to keep up with. So I
Okay.
think, you've got some seasonality changes, you've got if you add amenities, things like that. But overall, it's like stability is your friend here.
Absolutely agree. Now, having a little bit of movement can be helpful, and
Yep.
the other side of Price Labs that's helpful is the automation side of it. So, if you were sitting there and your rates are at 2,000 and it's like, "Hey, we can't get it booked out," tweak it down just a little bit. But on that note, I said that short term has a lot in common with midterm. But in midterm rentals, you want to make sure that you make small changes in at times. You don't ever want to go and change multiple things at once. And this is just kind of a tip for anybody that's looking at revenue management, whether it's for midterm rental or generally in life. You want to make those small tweaks, observe what happens with those tweaks, and then potentially add on to them. If you're trying to get $2,000, don't just slash your rate down to 1,400. You'll most likely get booked and you don't really learn anything from that, so to speak. If you got to get $1,400, you got to get $1,400. But my suggestion would be let's try taking, $50 off here, $50 off there, make small movements. That way you can observe and hopefully gather a little bit better information about what you can charge for your property.
I think you can actually take that advice and apply it to the entire way that you manage your midterm rental, right? I see some people, and I'll be talking to someone at a conference, and they're like, "I changed my pictures. I added pets. I, added access to the clubhouse, and I increased my price." And I'm like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! How are we gonna ever know what worked, right?" So, like one
Exactly.
thing at a time, having that patience. And I think if you want to do something like adding pets, but then you also want to add a pet deposit, fantastic, right? But then if you need to tweak something, maybe tweak the pet deposit amount. Let it simmer a little bit, see how it works out, and listen to what the market is telling you. Kyle, what are other ways that we can really hear what the market is telling you? Obviously, we have the kind of golden rule of like, well, you're either getting demand or you're not, you're booking or you're not, right? But what else can we use as kind of signals that it's like, okay, what you're doing is working, or hey, maybe it's time to tweak one of these things?
Yeah, I think number one is conversion. That are you actually getting the bookings coming in? You have great insights on Furnish Finder into the views that you have and the number of clicks. Those are going to be very important as well. So if you know that you average 7 clicks per week, let's just say 7, that's a little low. Let's go for 100 clicks per week. And then all of a sudden you bump up to 120, then you know that you've made a move that works for you. That is very important to really be able to observe. I think the amount of inquiries that you get is going to be that number one thing to say has something worked when I've tweaked it. Uh, but yeah, I think those are the main ones for me.
Yeah. I I would love to hear more. We can't go through a whole pricing episode without really hearing more on the short-term rental hosts that want to embrace midterm as well. So, for Katie and I, when we are midterm only, or we want to mainly focus on the midterm rental strategy, then we suggest to hosts one, the faucet method, where you turn on short-term rentals when you have local events or high seasons, and then you turn it off and turn on midterm rentals for the rest of the year. Another strategy is to fill your midterm rental gaps with short term rentals if your HOA or area allows you to. But Kyle, I'd love to hear from you for someone that is mainly short term rentals, but they're seeing a lot of vacancy or high swings in off season. How do you recommend they jump into calendar management and pricing to really hone in on how to add midterm rentals to their short term rental game?
Yeah, I think specifically from a PriceLab standpoint, we offer a lot of customizations within our tool for you to very easily switch that. So you can set it up to where January through March is a midterm rental season, and then everything else is a short term rental season. Again, I don't want to focus too much and make this a sales pitch for PriceLabs. It's really important to understand that the overall occupancy in the market, the earlier you can identify when you want to switch to a midterm strategy, the better it's going to be for you because you're able to get in there, make your rates exactly where you want them. In short-term rental space, you're allowed to play with your minimum stays a lot more than if you're in a homeowner association restricted type of a area or in a market that's really restrictive and says, hey, 30 nights only. So I think it's important to make your decision early, but ultimately what you want to do is you want to see what it is that you have that differentiates yourself during those periods. How are you going to convince people instead of staying 4 nights to come and stay 20 plus nights for you or 30 plus nights or 3 months if you want to. And generally what you need to do is really highlight, you know, the workspaces, all of those things. I would say spend a bunch of time researching Furnished Finder, see what they highlight on here. What you have as the amenities on your drop down, those are key for midterm rentals. If you're not offering pet friendly, if you're not offering dedicated workspaces, you're going to struggle a little bit. So I think it's important to do the research, but ultimately it's pretty simple. I think for you to switch to a midterm, especially because you have that ability to control your minimum length of stay a lot easier. Now, I love, and if you ever want to have a full on podcast about the drip method that you talked about, I love that strategy when people can do it. If I'm in Knoxville, if you can protect your Tennessee versus Alabama game, get $1,000 a night on it. Heck, that's perfect for you. And then you can go back into a midterm strategy. So
Definitely. And I'm pretty sure Kyle's referring to, you know, SDR for events that are really bringing a lot of people into your area with that drip method, and then switching over to midterm rentals in off season or slow season. I think the last part I really want to hone in to that's important for your pricing is if you have imbalanced tenant fees and your refundable deposits way higher than others in the market, or you're not taking advantage of the damage protection plan as an option for extra peace of mind for your rentals, then if those fees are imbalanced, then you're going to not be as competitive with your pricing either, even if your rental rate is on par. So I'd love, Katie, for you just to dive into some of those important fees that we've seen most common on Furnish Finder.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to remember a damage protection plan, which we offer with Wavo. That ranges from $59 to $79 a month. That can give you some added security if you are concerned about something like pets or just want an added layer of property protection. We have a lot of landlords who just sleep better at night knowing that they have that, which is fantastic. And a standard deposit is going to come with a midterm rental, which you're not going to see with your typical Airbnb, right? A short term stay. Most frequent amount we see there is about $500. We suggest about one third to one half of a month rent. These are important to your pricing because if you're asking for a full month's rent on a security deposit, you're probably going to lose some people there. And if you really feel strongly like you're like, nope, that's what I want, that's okay, right? You have the control, you can do that. You just need to know you might lose some people there. And I think to Kyle's point, test it, right? Lower it a little bit, see what changes, but test that one thing at a time. Cleaning fee is important. We're used to cleaning fees on short-term rentals. Midterm rentals are usually a little bit of a larger cleaning fee because that cleaner is going to get in there and wipe out all the cabinets and wipe the baseboards. More of a deep clean. And then you can also have a pet deposit. You can really have whatever you want, right? It's up to you. But it's important to be transparent. It's important to be reasonable, and it's important to be competitive. So just like we're saying to look at the listing price, like the rent price that you're charging, look at the fees of other competitors in the area too. And I really like what Kyle said to choose properties who have amenities that mimic yours and look at not only what their price is, but their fees too. So if there's a single family home that has a fenced yard that offers, dogs are allowed, cats are allowed, what's their what's their damage deposit like? What is their cleaning fee like? You can take hints and cues from these, which I think is a really important thing to remember. You don't have to start at 0.
That's the best place in revenue management for you to be able to differentiate yourself. Going back to, me talking about my experience on Furnished Finder, going in and looking at the Knoxville market, the one that I went to that looked like it was at the most premium spot had the 1 month you had to pay the full deposit of the month. I immediately backed out of it. If I were looking for a place on Furnished Finder, that was something that instantly was like, nope, not doing it. Can't spend an extra 4K on that. I go to the next one and you see it. So there is something about those extra fees that you've got in there. Doesn't matter if you've got 10 of them listed, if they're all reasonable and make sense to people, it's not gonna hurt you too much. Um, what hurts you is when people go in there and they say a cleaning fee that's $2,500 and everybody else is $400, so to speak. So
I would love to wrap up this episode with just simple, practical pricing strategies because it doesn't have to feel overwhelming. It doesn't have to feel like you're getting yourself in the weeds quickly. There's some simple tips you can apply. And I'd love to hear from Kyle how he recommends someone go, double check their pricing or get started with their midterm rental pricing, as we wrap up this episode.
yeah, so let's go to Furnish Finder, and then I want you to go in and I want you to look at a couple of different time periods in your area. And with that, let's look 3 months in advance and 6 months in advance. And I want you to observe how many properties are available 3 months out, how many are available 6 months out. If you can figure out those properties that are booked in between there, so like maybe you've got 150 that are available 3 months out, there's 170 that are booked out 6 months. Now you can, or available 6 months out, I should say. Look for those 20 that are in there and see what it is that's getting those booked out. Maybe it's because they've got incredibly low rates and it's just being picked off first. Maybe they've got year-long type stays. But there's always some type of information that you can get from there. If they have reviews, pay so much attention to your competition's reviews and see what people are saying good about them and negative about them. That's where you can really, really win with your property, is figuring out how do I do things the same as them that they're doing right, and how do I do better than them on the other side. So that'd be my piece of advice.
I love this. I think that is just such a great way to look at your rental business as a whole, right? What needs are you serving and how can you do it in a way that nobody else can match you?
Absolutely. Hospitality's the coming back to be the king, and hospitality and amenities are the wave of the future, I suppose.
Boom. Yes, sir. Well, I'd love just a reminder that if you're looking for resources, check the show notes, take advantage of PriceLabs strategy tools just to simplify and make your pricing easier. See the show notes for our new Furnish Finder pricing strategy worksheet. And just get in there, start looking at the maps on Furnish Finder, Airbnb, Zillow, and see what your competition is charging and jump into the midterm rental game. So thanks for joining us. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment if you'd like to share this episode with a friend. And of course, you can connect with Kyle through PriceLabs and the show notes. Thanks for being with us, everybody. Kyle, you got a one-liner you want to take us out with? Something fun, something motivational?
You mentioned the word fear a couple of times in this, and I know when it comes to pricing, there's a lot of fear. So right now, I get to take the time to say in Spanish, cero miedo, zero fear. Don't be worried about it. Go use what you've got. Use Furnished Finder, research your comps, and you'll be good to go.
All right. Thanks for joining us, Kyle, and we'll catch you all next time for all things midterm rentals. See you later.